Welcome to Craftlit, the podcast for crafters who love books. My name is Heather Ordover, and I'm podcasting from where the Delaware River meets the Old York Road, New Hope, Pennsylvania. Episode 535, My Kingdom for a Fan. This episode of Craftlit is brought to you by you. Thank you. Well, hello. How are you? I am well. I am also awake after having the first good night's sleep I've had in a while. It must be because I managed to get to the Craftlit Zoom chat last night for just a little bit. Huge, massive, enormous thank yous go out to Tracy in Atlanta, who has been my savior, my backup, my friend. It has been so nice to have a constant in life that is constant. It's awesome. So huge thank you, Tracy. It was so good to see everybody last night. I completely slept through Tuesday morning's Zoom chat, Tuesday morning on my side of the planet, and I got completely thrown off. We had Labor Day on Monday, completely forgot Tuesday was Tuesday. It felt like a week full of Mondays this week, and I didn't set the alarm early enough and slept straight through, which is odd because often I wake up on Tuesday mornings before my alarm, but not this week. So massive apologies for that, guys. I will know that it's Tuesday next week, and therefore I will be there. Oy. But work is still challenging, but that's because this was another week of writing, and there's still a lot to write because we keep learning more and more about COVID-19 and what our jobs are for our contact tracers here in Pennsylvania. It is fascinating to watch a moving target that is fueled by science, because people are learning things at a very rapid rate, and the amount of information that is being learned is growing all the time because we are able to share that information scientist to scientist, and it's pretty interesting. There is one article I am going to share with you if you are so inclined, because if you've been following this disease and ever watched the show House, you know that none of the explanations that we have heard so far for what this virus is actually doing have, quote unquote, checked all the boxes. There's always something left out. Like, they can figure out why your lungs might be affected, what with it looking like a respiratory disease. However, they can't figure out why there are neurological symptoms that seem to linger quite badly for some people. All of these little caveats are not being answered by the majority of the explanations until now. There's an article about what's being called, I think, the Brady-Kinnon hypothesis. It's a little complicated. I will let the people writing the article make it make sense to you, but I will tell you this. A supercomputer crunched a lot of numbers from a lot of studies, and what they managed to put together was really, really interesting. And for the first time, it checks all the boxes. And so I have been paying very close attention to my good friends, the virologists over at This Week in Virology. And it was fascinating because initially the Facebook page that they host had a lot of people have been asking us about this article. And while it looks fairly interesting, of course, what it really means, and the article says this as well, is this is something we have to look into really seriously, really fast, because a hypothesis is not a proof. So that was a month ago. This week on the YouTube/podcast, This Week in Virology, it was brought up again. And this time they were talking to a doctor who had been in New York City actually treating COVID-19 patients, who's been on the show a lot. He's a frequent co-host and guest. And he seemed to think quite favorably of this hypothesis. So we may actually have an explanation. And if we have an explanation, then we also have treatment options. It's very exciting stuff. So I am hopeful. I am not in any way, shape, or form telling you that there is an answer out there because, science. But I am hopeful. And so are they, it seems. So that's kind of cool. So yay, helpful, hopeful news. That's awesome. And that's particularly good because this week's chapter is a turning point. We have been creeping up a hill of Helen's tolerance. Helen continues to maintain her tolerance for her husband and her husband's friends, not, without some stumbles or moments of like that, but we hit a turning point today. And it is like the turning points that we remember from Jane Eyre. It is not without some fiery passion. It is also not without some calling out to God. It is very different from Jane Eyre, though, in some ways, because it actually gets quite explicit for its time. And you know that when I add for its time, I do not mean anyone is throwing down in the mud and ripping each other's clothes off. That's not going to happen. But there is a lot going on in here that is symbolically representative of people's innermost thoughts, feelings, emotions, all of that stuff. So I don't need to help you out with any terminology or anything like that as we head in. There are a few things to make sure you know about on the flip side. And with that, I'm going to let you listen to The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte, read for us by Maya Daguerre. Here we go.
Chapter 33, 2 Evenings. 7th. Yes, I will hope. Tonight I heard Grimsby and Hattersley grumbling together about the inhospitality of their host. They did not know I was near, for I happened to be standing behind a curtain in the bow of a window, watching the moon rising over the clump of tall dark elm trees below the lawn, and wondering why Arthur was so sentimental as to stand without, leaning against the outer pillar of the portico, apparently watching it too. "So I suppose we have seen the last of our merry carousals in this house," said Mr. Hattersley. "I thought his good fellowship wouldn't last long, but," added he, laughing, "I didn't expect it would meet its end this way. I rather thought our pretty hostess would be setting up her porcupine quills and threatening to turn us out of the house if we didn't mind our manners." "You didn't foresee this, then?" answered Grimsby, with a guttural chuckle. "But he'll change again when he's sick of her. If we come here a year or two hence, we shall have our own way. You'll see." "I don't know," replied the other. "She's not the style of woman you soon tire of. But be that as it may, it's devilishly provoking now that we can't be jolly because he chooses to be on his good behaviour." "It's all these cursed women," muttered Grimsby. "They're the very bane of the world. They bring trouble and discomfort wherever they come with their false fair faces and their damned deceitful tongues." At this juncture I issued from my retreat, and smiling on Mr. Grimsby, I passed, left the room, and went out in search of Arthur. Having seen him bend his course towards the shrubbery, I followed him thither, and found him just entering the shadowy walk. Oh, so light of heart, so overflowing with affection, that I sprang upon him and clasped him in my arms. This startling conduct had a singular effect upon him. First he murmured, "Bless you, darling," and returned my close embrace with a fervour like old times. And then he started, and in a tone of absolute terror exclaimed, "Helen, what the devil is this?" And I saw by the faint light gleaming through the overshadowing tree that he was positively pale by the shock. How strange the instinctive impulse of affection should come first, and then the shock of surprise. It shows at least that the affection is genuine. He's not sick of me yet. "I startled you, Arthur," said I, laughing in my glee. "How nervous you are!" "What the deuce did you do it for?" cried he, quite testily, extricating himself from my arms and wiping his forehead with his handkerchief. "Go back, Helen, go back directly. You'll get your death of cold." "I won't till I've told you what I came for. They're blaming you, Arthur, for your temperance and sobriety, and I'm come to thank you for it. They say it is all these cursed women, and that we are the bane of the world. But don't let them laugh or grumble you out of your good resolutions or your affection for me. He laughed. I squeezed him in my arms again and cried in tearful earnest, Do, do persevere, and I'll love you better than ever I did before. Well, well, I will, said he, hastily kissing me. There, go now, you mad creature. How could you come out in your light evening dress this chill autumn night? It's a glorious night, said I. It's a night that will give you your death in another minute. Run away, do. Do you see my death among those trees, Arthur? Said I, for he was gazing intently upon the shrubs as if he saw it coming, and I was reluctant to leave him in my new-found happiness and revival of hope and love. But he grew angry at my delay, so I kissed him and ran back to the house. I was in such good humour that night. Millicent told me I was the life of the party, and whispered she'd never seen me so brilliant. Certainly I talked enough for 20, and smiled upon them all. Grimsby, Hattersley, Hargrave, Lady Lowborough, all shared my sisterly kindness. Grimsby stared and wondered. Hattersley laughed and jested, in spite of the little wine he'd been suffered to imbibe, but still behaved as well as he knew how. Hargrave and Annabella, from different motives and in different ways, emulated me, and doubtless both surpassed me, the former in his discursive versatility and eloquence, the latter in boldness and animation at least. Millicent, delighted to see her husband, her brother, and her overestimated friend acquitting themselves so well, was lively and gay too, in her quiet way. Even Lord Lowborough caught the general contagion. His dark greenish eyes were lighted up beneath their moody brows. His sombre countenance was beautified by smiles. All traces of gloom and proud cold reserve had vanished for the time. And he astonished us all, not only by his general cheerfulness and animation, but by the positive flashes of true force and brilliance he emitted from time to time. Arthur did not talk much, but he laughed and listened to the rest, and was in perfect good humour, though not excited by wine, so that altogether we made a very merry, innocent, entertaining party. 9th. Yesterday, when Rachel came to dress me for dinner, I saw that she'd been crying. I wanted to know the cause of it, but she seemed reluctant to tell. Was she unwell? No. Had she heard bad news from her friends? No. Had any of the servants vexed her? Oh, no, ma'am, she answered. It's not for myself. What then, Rachel? Have you been reading novels? Bless you, no, she said, with a sorrowful shake of the head, and she sighed and continued. But to tell you the truth, ma'am, I don't like master's ways of going on. What do you mean, Rachel? He's going on very properly at present. Well, ma'am, if you think so, it's right. And she went on dressing my hair in a hurried way, quite unlike her usual calm, collected manner, murmuring to herself that she was sure it was beautiful hair and she could see and match it. When it was done, she fondly stroked it and gently patted my head. Is that affectionate ebullition intended for my hair or myself, nurse? Said I, laughingly turning round upon her. But a tear was even now in her eye. What do you mean, Rachel? I exclaimed. Well, ma'am, I don't know, but if what? Well, if I was you, I wouldn't have that Lady Lowborough in the house another minute. Not another minute, I wouldn't. I was thunderstruck, but before I could recover from the shock sufficiently to demand an explanation, Millicent entered my room, as she frequently does when she is dressed before me, and she stayed with me till it was time to go down. She must have found me a very unsociable companion this time, for Rachel's last words rung in my ears. But still I trusted they had no foundation, but in some idle rumour of the servants from what they had last seen in Lady Lowborough's manor last month, or perhaps from something that had passed between their master and her during the former visit. At dinner I narrowly observed both her and Arthur, and saw nothing extraordinary in the conduct of either, nothing calculated to excite suspicion, except in distrustful minds, which mine was not, and therefore I would not suspect. Almost immediately after dinner, Annabella went out with her husband to share his moonlight ramble, for it was a splendid evening like last. Mr. Hargrave entered the drawing-room a little before the others, and challenged me to a game of chess. He did it without any of that sad but proud humility he usually assumes in addressing me, unless he is excited with wine. I looked at his face to see if that was the case now. His eye met mine keenly but steadily. There was something about him that I did not understand, but he seemed sober enough. Not choosing to engage with him, I referred him to Millicent. "She plays badly," said he. "I want to match my skill with yours. Come now. You can't pretend you're reluctant to lay down your work. I know you never take it up except to pass an idle hour, when there's nothing better you can do." "But chess players are so unsociable," I objected. "They are no company for any but themselves." "There's no one here but Millicent, and she—" "Oh, I shall be delighted to watch you," cried out our mutual friend. "Two such players, it will be quite a treat. I wonder which will conquer." I consented. "Now, Mrs. Huntington," said Hargrave, as he arranged the men on the board, speaking distinctly and with peculiar emphasis, as if he had a double meaning to all his words. "You are a good player, but I am better. We shall have a long game, and you will give me some trouble, but I can be as patient as you, and in the end I shall certainly win." He fixed his eyes upon me with a glance I did not like, keen, crafty, bold, and almost impudent, already half triumphant in his anticipated success. "I hope not, Mr. Hargrave," returned I with vehemence that must have startled Millicent at least, but he only smiled and murmured, "Time will show." We set to work. He sufficiently interested in the game, but calm and fearless in the consciousness of a superior skill. I intensely eager to disappoint his expectations, for I considered this the type of a more serious contest, as I imagined he did, and I felt an almost superstitious dread of being beaten. At all events, I could ill endure that present success should add one title to his conscious power, his insolent self-confidence, I ought to say, or encourage for a moment his dream of future conquest. His play was cautious and deep, but I struggled hard against him. For some time the combat was doubtful. At length, to my joy, the victory seemed inclining to my side. I'd taken several of his best pieces, and manifestly baffled his projects. He put his hand to his brow and paused in evident perplexity. I rejoiced in my advantage, but dared not glory in it yet. At length he lifted his head, and quietly making his move, looked at me and said calmly, "Now you think you will win, don't you?" "I hope so," I replied, taking his pawn, that he had pushed into the way of my bishop with so careless an air that I thought it was an oversight, but was not generous enough under the circumstances to direct his attention to it, and too heedless at the moment to foresee the after consequences of my move. "It's those bishops that trouble me," said he, "but the bold knight can overlap the reverend gentleman," taking my last bishop with his knight. "And now, those sacred persons once removed, I shall carry all before me." "Oh, Walter, how you talk!" cried Millicent. "She has far more pieces than you still." "I intend to give you some trouble yet," said I, "and perhaps, sir, you will find yourself checkmate before you are aware. Look to your queen." The combat deepened. The game was a long one, and I did give him some trouble, but he was a better player than I. "What keen gamesters you are," said Mr. Hattersley, who had now entered and been watching us for some time. "Why, Mrs. Huntington, your hand trembles as if you'd staked your all upon it. And Walter, you dog, you look as deep and cool as if you were certain of success, and keen as cruel as if you would drain her heart's blood. But if I were you, I wouldn't beat her, for very fear she'll hate you if you do. She will, by heaven, I see it in her eye." "Hold your tongue, will you?" said I. His talk distracted me, for I was driven to extremities. A few more moves, and I was inextricably entangled in the snare of my antagonist. "Check!" cried he. I sought in agony for some means of escape. "Mate," he added, quietly, but with evident delight. He had suspended the utterance of that last fatal syllable, the better to enjoy my dismay. I was foolishly disconcerted by the event. Hattersley laughed. Millicent was troubled to see me so disturbed. Hargrave placed his hand on mine that rested on the table and squeezed it with a firm but gentle pressure, murmured, "Beaten, beaten," and gazed into my face with a look where exultation was blended with an expression of ardour and tenderness yet more insulting. "No, never, Mr. Hargrave," exclaimed I, quickly withdrawing my hand. "Do you deny?" replied he, smiling and pointing to the board. "No, no," I answered, recollecting how strange my conduct must appear. You've beaten me in that game. Will you try another then? No. You acknowledge my superiority? Yes, as a chess player. I rose to resume my work. Where is Annabella? Said Hargrave gravely after glancing round the room. Gone out with Lord Loughborough, answered I, for he looked at me for a reply. And not yet returned, he said seriously. I suppose not. Where is Huntington? Looking round again. Gone out with Grimsby, as you know, said Hattersley, suppressing a laugh, which broke forth as he concluded the sentence. Why did he laugh? Why did Hargrave connect them thus together? Was it true, then? And was this the dreadful secret he'd wished to reveal to me? I must know, and that quickly. I instantly rose and left the room to go in search of Rachel and demand an explanation of her words. But Mr. Hargrave followed me into the anteroom, and before I could open its outer door, gently laid his hand upon the lock. May I tell you something, Mrs. Huntington? Said he in a subdued tone, with serious, downcast eyes. If it be anything worth hearing, replied I, struggling to be composed, for I trembled in every limb. He quietly pushed a chair towards me. I merely leant my hand upon it, and bid him go on. Do not be alarmed, he said. What I wish to say is nothing in itself, and I will leave you to draw your own inferences from it. You say that Annabella is not yet returned. Yes, go on, said I impatiently, for I feared my forced calmness would leave me before the end of his disclosure, whatever it might be. And you hear, continued he, that Huntington is gone out with Grimsby? Well, I heard the latter say to your husband, or to the man who calls himself so, Go on, sir. He bowed submissively and continued. I heard him say, I shall manage it, you'll see. They're gone down by the water. I shall meet them there. I shall tell him I want a bit of a talk with him about things that we needn't trouble the lady with, and she'll say she can be walking back to the house, and then I shall apologise, you know, and I'll tip her the wink to take the way of the shrubbery, and I'll keep him talking there about those matters I mentioned, and anything else I can think of as long as I can, and then bring him round the other way, stopping to look at the trees and the fields and anything else I can find to discourse of. Mr. Hargrave paused and looked at me. Without a word of comment or further questioning, I rose and darted from the room and out of the house. The torment of suspense was not to be endured. I would not suspect my husband falsely on this man's accusation, and I would not trust him unworthily. I must know the truth at once. I flew to the shrubbery. Scarcely had I reached it when the sounds of voices arrested my breathless speed. We have lingered too long. He will be back, said Lady Loughborough's voice. Surely not, dearest, was his reply. But you can run across the lawn and get in as quietly as you can. I'll follow in a while. My knees trembled under me. My brain swam round. I was ready to faint. She must not see me thus. I shrunk among the bushes and leant against the trunk of a tree to let her pass. Ah, Huntington, she said reproachfully, pausing where I had stood with him the night before. It was here that you kissed that woman. She looked back into the leafy shade. Advancing thence, he answered with a careless laugh. Well, dearest, I couldn't help it. You know I must keep straight with her as long as I can. Haven't I seen you kiss your dolt of a husband scores of times? Do I ever complain? But tell me, don't you love her still, a little? She said, placing her hand on his arm and looking earnestly into his face. For I could see them plainly, the moon shining full upon them from between the branches of the tree that sheltered me. Not one bit, by all that's sacred, he replied, kissing her glowing cheek. Good heavens, I must be gone, cried she, suddenly breaking from him as she flew away. There he stood before me, but I had not the strength to confront him now. My tongue cleaved to the roof of my mouth. I was well nigh sinking to the earth, and I almost wondered if he did not hear the beating of my heart above the low sighing of the wind and the fitful rustle of the falling leaves. My senses seemed to fail me, but still I saw his shadowy form pass before me, and through the rushing sound in my ears, I distinctly heard him say, as he stood looking up the lawn, There goes the fool. Run, Annabella, run. There, in with you. Oh, he didn't see. That's right, Grimsby, keep him back. and even his low laugh reached me as he walked away. God help me now, I murmured, sinking on my knees among the dank weeds and brushwood that surrounded me, and looking at the moonlit sky through the scant foliage above. It seemed all dim and quivering now to my darkened sight. My burning, bursting heart strove to pour forth its agony to God, but could not frame its anguish into prayer, until a gust of wind swept over me, which, while it scattered the dead leaves like blighted hopes around, cooled my forehead and seemed a little to revive my sinking frame. Then, while I lifted up my soul in speechless, earnest supplication, some heavenly influence seemed to strengthen me within. I breathed more freely. My vision cleared. I saw distinctly the pure moon shining on and the light clouds skimming the clear dark sky. And then I saw the eternal stars twinkling down upon me. I knew their God was mine, and he was strong to save and swift to hear. I will never leave thee, nor forsake thee, he seemed to whisper from above their myriad orbs. No, no, I felt he would not leave me comfortless. In spite of earth and hell, I should have strength for all my trials and win glorious rest at last. Refreshed, invigorated, if not composed, I rose and returned to the house. Much of my newborn strength and courage forsook me, I confess, as I entered it and shut out the fresh wind and the glorious sky. Everything I saw and heard seemed to sicken my heart. The hall, the lamp, the staircase, the doors, the different apartments, the social sound of talk and laughter from the drawing room. How could I bear my future life in this house among those people? How could I endure to live? John just then entered the hall, and seeing me told me that he had been sent in search of me, adding that he had taken in the tea, and master wished to know if I were coming. "Ask Mrs. Hattersley to be so kind as to make the tea, John," said I. "Say I'm not well tonight and wish to be excused." I retired into the large, empty dining room, where all was silent and darkness, but for the soft sighing of the wind without, and the faint gleam of moonlight that pierced the blinds and curtains. There I walked rapidly up and down, thinking my bitter thoughts alone. How different was this from the evening of yesterday! That, it seems, was the last expiring flash of my life's happiness. Poor blinded fool that I was, to be so happy. I could now see the reason of Arthur's strange reception of me in the shrubbery. The burst of kindness was for his paramour, the start of horror for his wife. Now, too, I could better understand the conversation between Hattersley and Grimsby. It was doubtless of his love for her they spoke, not for me. I heard the drawing-room open. A light, quick step came out of the anteroom, crossed the hall and ascended the stairs. It was Millicent. Poor Millicent, gone to see how I was. No one else cared for me, but she still was kind. I shed no tears before, but now they came, fast and free. Thus she did me good, without approaching me. Disappointed in her search, I heard her come down more slowly than she had ascended. Would she come in there and find me out? No, she turned in the opposite direction and re-entered the drawing-room. I was glad, for I knew not how to meet her or what to say. I wanted no confidant in my distress. I deserved none and wanted none. I had taken the burden upon myself. Let me bear it alone. As the usual hour of retirement approached, I dried my eyes and tried to clear my voice and calm my mind. I must see Arthur tonight and speak to him, but I would do it calmly. There should be no scene, nothing to complain or boast of to his companions, nothing to laugh at with his lady-love. When the company were retiring to their chambers, I gently opened the door just as he passed. I beckoned him in. "What's to do with you, Helen?" said he. "Why couldn't you come to make tea for us? What the deuce are you here for in the dark? What ails you, young woman? You look like a ghost," he continued, surveying me by the light of his candle. "No matter," I answered. "To you. You have no longer any regard for me, it appears, and I have no longer any for you." "Hello, what the devil is this?" he muttered. "I would leave you tomorrow," continued I, "and never again come under this roof, but for my child." And I paused a moment to steady my voice. "What in the devil's name is this, Helen?" cried he. "What can you be driving at?" You know perfectly well. Let us waste no time in useless explanation. But tell me, will you? He vehemently swore he knew nothing about it, and insisted upon hearing what poisonous old woman had been blackening his name and what infamous lies I'd been fool enough to believe. Spare yourself the trouble of forswearing yourself and racking your brains to stifle truth with falsehood, I coldly replied. I've trusted to the testimony of no third person. I was in the shrubbery this evening, and I saw and heard for myself. This was enough. He uttered a suppressed exclamation of consternation and dismay, and muttering, "I shall catch it now," set down his candle on the nearest chair, and rearing his back against the wall, stood confronting me with folded arms. "Well, what then?" said he, with the calm insolence of mingled shamelessness and desperation. "Only this," returned I. "Will you let me take our child and what remains of my fortune and go?" "Go where?" "Anywhere where he will be safe from your contaminating influence, and shall be delivered from your presence and you from mine." "No, by Jove, I won't." "Will you let me have the child then without the money?" "No, nor yourself without the child. Do you think I'm going to be made the talk of the country for your fastidious caprices?" "Then I must stay here, to be hated and despised. But henceforth we are husband and wife only in the name." "Very good. I'm your child's mother and your housekeeper, nothing more. So you need not trouble yourself any longer to feign the love you cannot feel. I will exact no more heartless caresses from you, nor offer nor endure them either. I will not be mocked with the empty husk of conjugal endearments when you've given the substance to another." "Very good, if you please. We shall see who will tire first, my lady." "If I tire, it will be of living in the world with you, not of living without your mockery of love. When you tire of your sinful ways and show yourself truly repentant, I will forgive you, and perhaps try to love you again, though that will be hard indeed. In the meantime, you will go and talk me over to Mrs. Hargrave and write long letters to Aunt Maxwell to complain of the wicked wretch you've married." "I shall complain to no one. Hitherto I've struggled hard to hide your vices from every eye and invest you with the virtues you never possessed, but now you must look to yourself." I left him, muttering bad language to himself, and went upstairs. "You are poorly, ma'am," said Rachel, surveying me with deep anxiety. "It's too true, Rachel," said I, answering her sad looks rather than her words. "I knew it, or I wouldn't have mentioned such a thing." "But don't you trouble yourself about it," said I, kissing her pale, time-wasted cheek. "I can bear it better than you imagine." "Yes, you were always forbearing. But if I was you, I wouldn't bear it. I'd give way to it and cry right hard. I'd talk too, and I would. I'd let him know what it was to—" "I have talked," said I. "I've said enough." "Then I'd cry," persisted he. "I wouldn't look so white, so calm, and burst my heart with keeping it in." "I have cried," said I, smiling in spite of my misery. "And I am calm now, really, so don't discompose me again, nurse. Let us say no more about it, and don't mention it to the servants. There you may go now. Good night, and don't disturb your rest for me. I shall sleep well if I can." Notwithstanding this resolution, I found my bed so intolerable that before 2 o'clock I rose, and lighting my candle from the rushlight that was still burning, I got my desk and sat down in my dressing-room to recount the events of the past evening. It was better to be so occupied than to be lying in bed torturing my brain with recollections of the far past and anticipations of the dreadful future. I have found relief in describing the very circumstances that have destroyed my peace, as well as the little trivial details attendant upon their discovery. No sleep I could have got this night would have done so much towards composing my mind and preparing me to meet the trials of the day. I fancy so, at least. And yet, when I cease writing, I find that my head aches terribly, and when I look into the glass, I'm startled at my haggard and worn appearance. Rachel has been to dress me, and says I've had a sad night of it, she can see. Millicent has just looked in to ask me how I was. I told her I was better, but to excuse my appearance, admitted that I'd had a restless night. I wish this day were over. I shudder at the thoughts of going down to breakfast. How shall I encounter them all? Yet let me remember it is not I that am guilty. I have no cause to fear, and if they scorn me as the victim of their guilt, I can pity their folly and despise their scorn.
So Helen, dude, she basically said she's not going to share a marital bed with her husband anymore, and she said it in front of you. That's kind of a really, really big deal. It's not even kind of a really big deal. That's a big deal. For one thing, Anne Bronte, as far as we know, was never in a relationship that got this serious, period. But the girl was paying attention. And not just paying attention to things like this, but also paying attention to the way women were described in lots of different texts. There were several different plays and scenes in books that used chess, much the same way that Anne Bronte did in this particular chapter. There was a Thomas Middleton play, and Middleton was writing somewhere around, I don't know, 1620, something like that, 1630. But he had a play called Women Beware Women that had some symbolic chess playing in it as well. However, the symbolic chess playing in his play was quite different from what we saw happening with Hargrave here. And this, I thought, minced no words. Helen was advancing using her bishop, her religious figure. Hargrave takes his knight, his young, hot knight, who's all virile and everything, and catching her bishop unawares, knocks the bishop off the board, leaving her queen, her virtue, her womanhood available. This is not accidental. This is not Jack and Jilling it, trying to make something out of nothing. This is pretty clearly what's going on. And Hargrave gets it. He knows he is playing a symbolic game. This is where it gets really interesting, because usually characters are not aware that they are playing a symbolic game. It's something subtextual that the author is doing for us to pick up on. This is different. This is Hargrave calculating. He's just a really good chess player. And so when he sees this opportunity for his knight to take the bishop, for him, he gets, this is good, because this is even exactly what's going on right now. And somehow Hargrave, I don't know, being an idiot, thinks that by helping Helen understand what's happening with her husband, he's gonna be welcomed with open arms and she's gonna like him more. I don't know why he's thinking what he's thinking rationally, but he does appear to think that Helen will appreciate what he's done for her here. I don't know either. But Helen goes on to have a moment of transcendence, and it is only done in one paragraph, and it is, I think, a considerably quieter moment of transcendence than the ones that we saw in Jane Eyre, which are a little more dramatic and a little more overwrought, which kind of fits Jane Eyre. The story is a little more dramatic and a little more overwrought. Anne Bronte's book is really grounded in a reality that she witnessed, or at least witnessed bits and pieces of during the time that she was a governess. In our story here, when Helen realizes just how badly she has been played by Arthur and Arabella, she falls to her knees and asks God for help. The fact that she feels a breeze blow over her, that a wind sweeps through her, an influence of wind, an inflow of the Holy Spirit hits her. It's much quieter. It is not a chestnut tree being struck in half by a lightning bolt. It is a moment of grace where God is letting her know she's not alone. She looks up, she sees the stars. She knows that her center will hold. God is going to be there with her. And this is a very serious, very real moment for her, and a very serious, very real piece of writing for Anne. This is, we've seen chunks of Anne Bronte's theology all the way through the book. This is another one of them. And Anne, having been a quieter, gentler Bronte than Charlotte and certainly than Emily, perhaps this is one of the reasons why Tenant of Wildfell Hall never caught on the way that the overwrought, far more gothic, dramatic novels did. But this moment of quiet grace is something that I find really quite lovely in its understatement. It's so easy to pass over that section and just read it as a nice, pretty description of Helen getting her mojo back and girding her loins and preparing herself to go into what is going to be a very domestic kind of battle. But it is more than that. And it is clear that Helen's belief system, Helen's trust in and faith in her God being there for her, is part of what allows her to continue on for the rest of the book. And we know she does because we saw her at the beginning of the book. We're all in the middle of a very long flashback right now. But she is whole at the beginning of the book and still tough and still herself. So we know she's going to get there, which is kind of nice because right now it doesn't look so good. How long did it take before you knew that Arthur thought she was someone else when she surprised him out by the shrubbery? My heart broke, man. I was so convinced things were going to get better. I mean, I knew they had to get worse, right? I knew it. I didn't want it to happen like that. That just hurt. Oh, Arthur, you putz. Man. But Helen, strength of character. She's got it. Gotta respect that. And with that, I'm going to let you go. And I'm going to go get some breakfast. And I will talk to you soon. Take care of each other. Take care of yourself. Wear a mask. Wash your hands. Have a great week. I'll talk to you soon. Bye. If you like what you heard today, please leave a review over at iTunes. Join us on Facebook. Meet up with the knitters on Craftlet's Corner of Ravelry. Stay in the know on Instagram, or add your name to our mailing list, which I promise will never spam you. In fact, you probably want to buy a lottery ticket on any day that you get a message from the Craftlet mailing list, because that'll be a special day. And remember, if your hands are too busy to pick up a book, at least you can turn one on.